This is Nicholas Alexiou, Department of Sociology and the Hellenic American Project, Queen's College, CUNY. And today, in the series of oral history archives, we are very pleased and very honored to host Dr. Anne FLESOR BECK. Doctor, welcome to the Hellenic American Project. Dear Anne, thank you for your consent accepting our invitation to do this interview. We appreciate this very much. We're going to talk about your Greek American experience and to talk also about your exceptionally good, well-written and informative book. And you can see the book, Sweet Greeks. Thank you very much and welcome to the Hellenic American Project. And for the record, our film director, and I want to extend my thanks to our film director and producer, Mr. Konstantinos Stamatakos. Thank you very much. And let's start with some of the personal and family background. You can say your name, the place of birth, the family roots, who came first in America, and how was the environment growing up in America.
Okay, my name is Anne FLESOR BECK. I want to also thank both of you, and I'm very honored to be part of this project. I was born in Tacoma Park, Maryland. My father ended up in the Washington, D.C. area after World War II, and so he and my mother married before, actually, my father went to the war. He was drafted. They eloped and got married. But anyway, so he ended up on the East Coast, and that's where there are three of us children. So I'm the oldest. I have a brother who's 2 years younger, and my sister's 8 years younger. And we lived on the East Coast until I was 10. And my father actually had some financial challenges, and we ended up back in the Midwest. So that was the mid-60s. And my father, then we went to Tuscola, Illinois, and we were then immersed into, at the time called Tuscola Candy Kitchen, where my grandfather had been since on and off, 1901.
Both of your parents are American born?
Yes. My mother is not Greek. She was born in Chicago. My father was born in Tuscola, Illinois. He is one of 8 children that were born, and he was born at home. And my grandfather married Sophia Tingus, who was from Boston, and she was born in Boston. Her parents came from Greece. My grandfather came from the Peloponnese, a village called Pigodakia, and he came around the turn of the 1900s. He went to Chicago from Ellis Island and was going to he kind of was sponsored by his uncle. Vrinios is the Greek name. When he got to Illinois, it was Vriner. So in Champaign-Urbana, there was a candy store called Vriner's. So we call him Old Man Vriner as I was growing up. And Pete Vriner partnered with another Greek man called Mr. Vecchi. And they were in Chicago, and somebody said, you should go south to Champaign-Urbana. There's a university there, and you can go into business. And so Mr. Vecchi, Mr. Vriner opened up. They kind of did fruit peddling and selling on the street. And then they went into candy making, and they thought, well, let's expand our business. So Mr. Vecchi said, if I'm going to make candy, I want to do it correctly. I want to make the best I can make. So we call Mr. Vecchi kind of the Pied Piper of candy making in central Illinois. He went to Boston to cooking school. I could not find out where, but he learned how to make candy and make it well, and he came back to Champaign-Urbana. And my grandfather then learned to make candy from Mr. Vecchi and Mr. Vriner because they decided they had established a place in Champaign-Urbana, and they said, we're going to go south to Tuscola, which was 30 miles south on the railroad, And they opened up Tuscola Candy Kitchen in 1901. My grandfather came, he apprenticed with them, and they said, Gus, FLESOR, if you want to buy this business, it'll cost $500. And so my grandfather said, all right. And he went out west with a lot of other Greek immigrants and other Southeastern immigrants, Chinese immigrants. He worked on the railroad. As the story goes, he made $1, $1.50 a day. There are great histories written on the Greek experience working on the railroad. So he did that for a year, year and a half, and came back to Illinois and bought the candy kitchen business. 1904 was the year that my grandfather had his own stamp on it, and he sent for his two brothers from Greece, and the three FLESOR brothers worked in Tuscola Candy Kitchen for a couple of decades. One of my great uncles went to fight in World War I. And my grandfather then, this gets back to who's my grandmother, okay, had established himself. He built a house for himself. He built a house for his brothers. He had a business. I mean, this is all within, not very long time, and quite impressive. So he went to the Greek church in Champaign and Danville, Illinois, which was kind of north of Tuscola, and said, I am ready for a wife. And Sophia Tingus was visiting some cousins. She was beautiful. We have one picture of her, truly a beautiful woman, very much younger than my grandfather. But she came, and they had 8 children in almost as many years, and 3 of them died, 2 in childbirth later, and then my other cousin, my other aunt, whom I never knew, died later in life. But my grandmother had septicemia. She had all of her children at home, and I'm not sure quite what happened, but my father was very little when his mother died. And so she died. My grandfather never remarried, and they had like a succession of housekeepers and caretakers, but my grandfather raised 5 kids on his own and worked in his business 7 days a week. So
it's also a very demanding business, long hours.
Oh, well, yes. I mean, they get there early in the morning, and at the time in our little town, there was a movie theater, and this was before, interstate system. So these towns all across the country were very self-sufficient. They had their own grocery stores, clothing stores, dime stores, banks, newspapers, hardware stores, movie theaters. So for a lot of the Greeks coming to these small towns, they could open up on the corner, a lot of them, the soda fountain and candy store, and kind of the communal place to meet. And so our store was open every day, usually 7 in the morning, and if there was a movie late at night, my grandfather would literally roll the popcorn machine out to the sidewalk and make popcorn and roast peanuts, and he would serve people until the last show was over. So that could be 9 or 10 o'clock at night. So if you were a child and you could be tall enough to hit the cash register, that was what we all said, you went to work. So we all went to work because my dad was working. If we didn't have school activity, then we had to go to work after school and on weekends. So we all worked 7 days a week too. Maybe not all day, but
before we go there,
sorry.
I would like to ask or discuss with you, and then because of your professional training, and studies, your background, to explain the name. Because FLESOR is not a name from the Peloponnese.
No, it was FLESORUS. And what I found interesting, though, when I was researching through Ancestry and all of the census data, for a lot of the Greeks coming to our area in central Illinois, the names did change. So my grandfather's name was FLESORUS, and then over time with the census changed to FLESOR with 1 S. Some of our relatives had 2 S's. And that was very interesting. One of the census reports for my grandfather had the last name as Gelson, Gelson. So I always caution people, don't just bypass and go quickly through, the census data and think, oh, well, it's not here, because the census person heard what they heard and they would write down what they would hear. And so perhaps my grandfather was not as articulate or spelled.
You said he went through Ellis Island?
Yes, he did. And so very cool. My sister and I went to Ellis Island and saw the record there, which was very humbling.
How that felt?
It felt very humbling, especially when you think if he had had any kind of illness or, he wouldn't be able to come. But how scary would that be? But on the other hand, as a young man, how much of an adventure that would be too.
Do you know how old he was?
I'm going to say he was 18-ish, yeah.
Young person.
Yeah.
But I like your insight about why this generation chose or were forced to change their last name, because they had to be Americanized, and the fear. Do you think that the Greeks, they were considered exactly white at that time?
I think for some that I talked with my research, the names were long. The Okos or Apodopoulos, or, at the end. I think where we live in the Midwest, it's mostly German, Irish, Scottish backgrounds. And so very plain names, Brown, Smith, German names. I think some of the German people changed their names as well. They wanted to not be different. They wanted to assimilate pretty quickly, and I will say my grandfather did do that. Although growing up, I was very aware of having a different background. I remember one time I was walking down the sidewalk and somebody said, "Oh, you're a FLESOR." I thought, well, what does that mean? Is that bad? I don't know. But a little bit, I think, with some of the Greeks in these small towns, they were the only immigrants that were not from the South or coming up from the Ohio River, or coming across the country. So they were different, and they tried to not be different.
Tell us a few things about growing up. How Greek was the environment at home, the language. It was Greek at home and English outside home, at school and friends. How was it?
When we moved to Illinois, we were not Greek at home. My mother was not Greek, so we did not speak Greek at home. I wasn't really aware of being Greek until maybe I was in high school and what that meant. My grandfather, we all knew, had an accent. My Aunt Agnes, who was across the street, didn't speak much English, and we were aware of our Greek. The FLESORs were Greek. Did we as a family embrace that publicly or celebrate that publicly? No. We did not go to the Greek Orthodox Church. My grandfather raised his children as Protestant, and so I did not know about the Greek Orthodox Church really until my grandfather died and the bishop came to bless him on his way to the next spiritual place. So there wasn't a lot of Greek other than in the store. So every day my grandfather and my father, while my grandfather was still living, my grandfather would come to the store every day until he was about 88. Every day. So he would walk the block uptown and he would sit at the end of the soda fountain and talk to everybody, and at the time you could smoke in public, so he smoked his cigars. And my grandfather and my father would speak Greek. My father's cousins would speak Greek, but we did not. We spoke, as I said earlier, the store Greek. certain words, or my father would yell certain Greek things, and we knew he was mad. I would say, as far as being Greek, as opposed to not being Greek, we yelled a lot. We're yellers. I'm still a yeller. My husband is not always used to that. My sister and I, well, when we were working together, would just yell all the time. We just yell. So I guess that we had mannerisms. Our diet was also a little Greek. We had lamb, we had salad, we had, spanakopita, we had food. So we knew that was different than my classmates and things.
When the grandfather came, and later your father, before they got married or after they got married, they had a chance to visit Greece at all?
My grandfather never went back. My father did not go to Greece, even though he was in World War II and went to Europe. So no. And some of my cousins went to Greece, but there wasn't a back and forth every year or every few years. One of my grandfather's relatives came from Greece to visit, which was a big, big deal. But no. My grandfathers had Chicago cousins up here in Chicago, and so they went to Greece back and forth a little bit, but our family did not. And partly, I think it was because my grandfather worked all the time. Everybody worked all the time. And he was raising his kid, and I don't know if after a while he just didn't want to go. During the Depression, while he was raising his children and running the store, he bought a farm, paid cash, which that was a big deal. And so he got involved with that. He had a man, Mr. Williams, his farm for him. So that was an extra income, which was great because, during the Depression, there wasn't a lot going on. I will say my grandfather did, I heard, drive around and visit other Greeks when he was younger. So that was important. I know Mr. BECK from Champaign would drive around to the Greeks in Tuscola and Arcola, the town south of us, to mentor these young Greeks with their candy making, just to make sure they were doing it correctly. So that was interesting. One of the greatest aspects, though, that I did learn about with the Greek churches, the Champaign Greek Church, Decatur, Illinois, Springfield, and there was a small one in Danville, is that they all kept in touch. And if you look at the church celebratory volumes that would come out periodically, all of the Greeks who were in business would buy an ad. And so you knew that, I knew there was that connection there. And my grandfather always would buy an ad in the book, usually for Champaign, sometimes for Decatur. So that was really how I knew they all. So a funny story, though, my father's cousins retired and they went to Largo, Florida, which is near Tarpon Springs. So I went to visit because they said, please come visit. So it was after one of the more brutal winters here in the Midwest, and those of you who lived here through the 70s will remember that. But anyway, so I went there in March during my school break, and we went to lunch at Tarpon Springs, and the owner of the restaurant said, oh, well, you're Paul FLESSOR's daughter. I thought, they all know each other. It's a club. It's a, I don't know. Yeah, so that kind of really freaked me out. But I realized that the Greek network worked, and I think it still works. I'm never surprised when somebody can place me somewhere along the line. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, definitely, because you see, it is the networking that helps the individuals and the community to coexist and grow. And this is something that you continue later when with your sister?
Yes, yes and no. I mean, I had been going to the Greek Orthodox Church, so I knew the Greek community in Champaign-Urbana. and, you know, a lot of some restaurateurs. My father, when he was in business too, knew the Greeks in Champaign-Urbana, particularly those in the food business, because, you know, if you didn't have a candy store, you had a restaurant. A lot of restaurants in Champaign have had Greeks running them. So we knew them and we knew of them. But again, we didn't go to church. I didn't go to church till I moved to the East Coast and joined on my own volition. But they all kind of kept in touch with each other. I don't know if they were particularly supportive per se, but they all knew each other. And basically where we are, it's a very small community. So that was kind of...
Another very interesting aspect of your life and experience I would like to share, because it has some uniqueness culturally and sociologically. On one hand, the Protestant ethic and experience, and the Greek Orthodox on the other hand, and also the difference between growing up in the Midwest in a small community and then going to the East Coast to the larger, more metropolitan areas. So I would like to share some experience if you see any difference between smaller place in America and larger place, East and Midwest and East, and also the two religions that sometimes they coexist or sometimes they are in conflict as far as concern ideologies. How you work it out?
That's a great question. Let me start with the difference between the Midwest and the East Coast. I did move into a more metropolitan area. I moved to Connecticut, so there was a Greek church in the city where I worked, and so I went to church as a Protestant, and my mother told us, who was a Protestant, she said, you will go to church till you're 18. I don't care what you do after that. If you don't want to go to church, great, but you will learn the basic tenets of Christianity. There you go. So we all went to Sunday school and went to church. And I guess I was maybe spiritually looking for something else. And so I knocked on the door at the Greek Orthodox Church and said, hello, I'm Ann FLESSOR from the Midwest, and I'd like to know more I'd like to join your church. Well, the priest said, oh no, you will take catechism first. I need to know you're honest. And so for a year, once a week, I went and read everything. I learned all about the Greek Orthodox Church, Orthodox spirituality, the rituals. I went to church. I was running a YWCA at the time. Our electrician was Greek Orthodox, so he and his wife adopted me. They became my sponsors and my godparents, and I loved them desperately. And Sam, his first name, would call me on Sunday morning if he didn't think I was coming to church. Ann, are you up? And so the fun part for me about going to the Greek church was just the spiritual piece of it was very different than the Protestant. To me, the Protestant church was a little dogmatic. The Orthodox religion for me was more spiritual, which sometimes was disconcerting because they wouldn't give you the answer, like, here's how it is. It'd be like, it will come, let go. The Spirit will answer your question. This is a religion that has been going on for thousands of years. We do not deviate from our belief system, which gave me a lot of comfort. And so I did embrace it. But I want to kind of wrap in the work ethic with that, because I think for Greeks, and even when I was doing my research for my book, it was documented that the Greeks worked really, really hard all the time. And they liked to also be entrepreneurial. They had a hard time working for others. So I found that in the Midwest, particularly in my own family. And those, who settled, whether it was Champaign-Urbana or in Chicago, this first generation, they wanted to be in business. They wanted to succeed, and they wanted to do it on their own terms. And when I went to the East Coast, I found a lot of that as well, even though formal education was very much lauded and promoted. So we had, subsequent generations of Greek immigrants coming who were graduate students, who were very professional people. But those who were in the food business, which there were many, worked really hard. So that wasn't any different. And I liked that. I felt very comfortable with that. Our church in Connecticut still has a Greek festival. It's 5 days long. They make a ton of money. But the guy who organized it for years was a judge, and he would take the week off on vacation and run this Greek festival. So my job for the festival was to give tours of the Greek Orthodox Church, because in Connecticut you have a lot of Catholics, a lot of Protestants. So my job was to talk about the differences and similarities, so I could talk about the history when the Catholics, left the Orthodox Church. I found a lot of people had no idea what the Orthodox religion was. So that was very fun for me to explain the history and say, well, Orthodox first, Catholics, Protestants, and that was just an eye-opener for so many people. And I still do that to this day. In fact, we were in a cab on our way over here today, Ethiopian cab driver. So I said, oh, are you a Coptic Christian? He said, oh, no, I'm Greek Orthodox. They're everywhere. So that was a fun conversation, so we get each other right away. It was really fun.
Also, you have studies on African American history. Do you see any similarities with the Greek civilization? Or how African Americans were treated in America or elsewhere, how the Greeks were treated in America? Can you tell us?
What I find so fascinating and sad, my undergraduate degree is in Afro-American Studies, which I will say many people in our town, in little town in Central Illinois, thought, really, Anne, have you lost your mind? Why are you doing that? And but I will say both of my parents were extremely supportive. My grandfather and my father grew up, and my parents. My grandfather was very helpful to people in town. Not only did he raise his own children, but he helped other children. There was a small African American community in Tuscola, Illinois, before World War II that my dad had several friends from there, and I think I always grew up embracing humankind, I will say this. And I always tell my story, and I did write it in my book, and I found out about some similarities with my grandfather. Did my grandfather experience the overt racism like African Americans? No. But he did experience some real resistance to his immigration experience. So in the 1920s here in America, even in Chicago, there's a great book called The Ku Klux Klan in Chicago. The Ku Klux Klan was very, very active in our part of the world. Thousands of people were involved, and also women were involved. It wasn't just men in white sheets. Because at the time, the world was in flux. Society was in flux, not only around the world, but also here in the United States. So after World War I, there was a great anti-immigration backlash here in America. And my grandfather, let's go back, 1904, right? So he'd been around for almost 20 years. So what was happening in central Illinois, the Ku Klux Klan was very anti-Catholic. They were anti-Greek. They would say out loud, anti-Greek. So you know that the Greek communities were impacting business somewhere, but mostly in Champaign-Urbana, because in Champaign-Urbana, even at the University of Illinois, the fraternity presidents were in the Klan. In Champaign-Urbana, the businessmen would wear a little pin that would indicate they were in the Klan. So our Mr. Vakey, beloved Pied Piper of the candy-making community, was denied access to housing in a certain part of Champaign-Urbana because he was Greek. So the Ku Klux Klan burned a cross right in front of my grandfather's store. They burned a cross in his yard. They had a cross burning up 5 blocks up at the park. And I found out about this. I didn't know. Never talked about it. I found out about this. I was working after school one day, and my grandfather's down at the end of the soda fountain. Like I mentioned earlier, my dad and I are behind the soda fountain. I'm working. So this older man comes in, and hi, Gus, says to my grandfather, and my grandfather says hi, and he had some Greek name for him. And the guy smiles like, oh, you know, here we are every day, 2 o'clock, whatever, getting my Coke, coffee. Gus says hi. But I'm standing there, you know, I'm getting drinks, and because I listen, I learned so much behind the soda fountain about life, I have to tell you. But anyway, so later on, I asked my dad, I said, what was that name grandfather, you know, called Mr. Smith? So my dad like drags me down to the back of the store. He says, well, that means horse's ass in Greek. And I said, okay, well, why is grandfather called horse's ass? He said, well, he was in the Klan. I thought, wow. And I knew of the Ku Klux. And I said, so I'm thinking, it's late, what year was this? 70s. I thought every day for decades, my grandfather's calling this man a horse's ass and taking his money. Good for him. But apparently my grandfather kept like a secret list maybe in his head of everybody he knew who was in the Klan. And however it was, he had his own form of protest as years went by. But our local newspaper was very supportive of my grandfather and his brothers. They wrote a great editorial. There were some in these small towns who were not as supportive. A lot of the Greeks ignored the Klan. They held fast, kept with their business. Some in the Midwest succumbed to the resistance and, you know, went out of business. It was really, really sad because it was so short-lived. But I will say my grandfather hung in there because, you know, he was a beloved fixture in the town. So that's how I learned about the Klan. And I think that's why my grandfather and my father, they were just, you know, embracing. But I will also say, I think it also impacted my dad quite a bit, and he wanted to be, you know, not the other, more, yeah.
But yourself, 2 generations later, mm-hmm. you had an experience of discrimination or racism, or the Greeks or Americans of Greek descent, they were part of the mainstream American society. I don't know if I was
discriminated against. I will say, though, I was holding my nephew, my sister's oldest. I'm his godmother, and in his baptism. And he was like a bag of rocks. He was very heavy. But anyway, there was a guy behind me, prominent person in our town, who said, well, there's another dumb Greek. I was just mortified, and I thought, wow. And he said it so I could hear it. And I thought, really? Really? You're going to say that to me? My nephew has turned out to have a PhD in physics. He's brilliant, you know. But that was the message I got, and I thought, wow, here we are, 4 generations later, you know. No, did I ever feel discriminated against because I was Greek? No. Per se. As a woman, yes.
Yeah, I would like to ask you
Yeah.
that because you are the third generation in the confectionery business and also a female
Yeah.
businesswoman.
Yeah.
How that played out?
Yeah, that's been interesting. And my sister, her career was in education, so she hadn't really been out in the world. I'd been out in the world a little bit, so I worked in nonprofits, I worked in corporate settings. I'd been insulted, marginalized, you know, you name it, but whatever, survived. When we went for, we put a lot of our own money into our reopening our business. We wrote grants. We went to different financial institutions for loans, which we did not always get. So that was interesting because I think we were women. And we have been insulted over the years, covertly and overtly, by our customers. Primarily, I think the perception has been, with some, not all, that here we are, we're cooks. We have aprons on, so we're manual laborers. There are people who assume we've never gone to college or been outside of the central Illinois. I can't tell you how many people have come into the store and say, oh, well, we're from the suburbs. Like, I don't know where that is, you know. So I say, oh, well, you know, my mother grew up in Hinsdale. Oh, you know, so I don't know. And I'm always amused by that. And, but I think you get that a lot anyway in retail. If you're working with the public, you know, people are strange.
But it is a difference if you go to the East Coast or all the way out to the West Coast. It's different, a small place than...
Well, maybe. I don't want to generalize. I will say on the East Coast, working, I felt a lot more freedom to be myself. You know, I didn't feel like I had to fit into a set of rules, norms, societal norms. I haven't spent much time on the West Coast, but, you know, I think people who are more urban have a wider experience of life. Where we are in central Illinois, it's still pretty parochial on many levels. So, yeah. It's interesting.
I would like your sense of how you identify yourself as a Greek American, as an American.
Good
this
question.
is one part that has a lot of interest, and also the other thing I would like to ask: what Greece means to you?
Yeah, well, these are all, you know, since I had shared earlier, since you contacted me, I've done a lot of soul searching, thinking about it. One of the interesting aspects of my research has been that whole question of identity. What is Greek identity? What does that mean? Who's Greek? I don't know that there's a definitive answer for that. I know a lot of people say, well, if you're Greek Orthodox or you're Orthodox, then you're Greek because of church. Although, you know, my grandfather didn't go to church. My father didn't go to church, but they both were baptized. In fact, when my father died, I made sure we had that ceremony at the end of his life. I thought, well, I need to put some closure on this, even though he never went to church. But I just did my DNA test with Ancestry. So it came back, seriously, Anne, you are Greek ancestry, Peloponnese, for thousands of, you know, your roots run deeply. I thought, okay. Do I say to people, oh, I'm Greek American? Not usually. When I've gone abroad, I will obviously, you know, I'm American. If I'm talking about our store, our business, or the history, I'll say I am Greek American, even though my mother was not Greek. So technically I'm half. when I am talking about my book, I will say I am Greek American, although my grandfather would call us half-breeds because I don't think he was very happy that my father did not marry a Greek girl. And in fact, my oldest aunt had an arranged marriage with a Greek man, which was very sad. But my father and his brother and his sister all married non-Greeks. So there you go. So all of the cousins, we're all half Greeks, except for my cousins who are across the street. They married Greek women. What I found in my research with these small towns and the Greek families, or Greek males primarily, who went, some of them never married. Some of them married the women that they met in their town, so they were German American, Scottish American, Irish American, or they went back to Greece and brought somebody over. I find more in Champaign-Urbana, the urban areas, a pure line of Greek ancestry because they would come from Chicago or larger areas and then would come down. So that was interesting to me. I think a lot of the intermarriage was expediency for these men who came and wanted a partner, and they were there in business and they were there. So my grandfather obviously married a Greek woman, so my father was fully Greek. But we never talked about being Greek at home. We knew we were Greek, but my mother also was at the other end of the dining room table, and she talked about her ancestors who were very interesting as well. And so we learned a lot about both sides.
You participate, or it was you had opportunities to, the holidays, the national holidays or the religious holidays. You observe them, the Greek holidays.
No,
Easter. That came later.
Came later. In fact, I made my sister put the Greek flag up in our store, which she still has there. No, we do honor in our store, in our business, the Orthodox Easter. We don't get a lot of business from Greeks for Orthodox Easter, which is very interesting as a candy business. We do not celebrate the National Greek Independence Day at all. I don't know that they don't have I don't think they have a parade or anything in Champaign, but we are aware of it they are aware of it as a community, and they will put out, the church will honor it. I'll just say that. So, yeah.
According to the latest census, the Americans of Greek descent, they are numerically more than the Greek-born, because we have this tremendous demographic change. We have more American-born than the immigrant generation now. And we're about altogether between 1.3 and 1.5 million Americans of Greek descent altogether. So, and the communities always have this anxiety or debates about the continuity of the Greek American community. How you envision. This is one part about the future of Hellenism in America, and the other is as an educated woman and also a businesswoman, your advice to the young Greek American or American.
Yeah. I don't. I'll be honest with you. I don't worry about it. I think because my family had so much intermarriage, so to me, it wasn't. I wasn't raised to, oh, you have to marry a Greek man. I don't know. There's kind of a secret, and don't take this personally. I think it's you have to be a very strong woman to be married to a very strong man. And I will say most Greek males that I know are very strong people. If you have, and I do know many Greek males who are very supportive and respectful of women who work. I know many who are not. And there's some kind of, I know I'm going to get letters and emails. I think inherent, and maybe that's the wrong word, expectation of more traditional roles. Don't quote me on this. I don't know. I have not married Greek men, not on purpose, but just that wasn't what happened in my life. So I love them. I love the Greek women too. I think there's, I'll share a story with you. When my grandfather died, a lot of people came from, the Greeks came from Chicago, wherever. So the women ended up in the kitchen at our restaurant fixing food. And I'm young. I mean, I'm like young, 8th grade maybe, I don't know. So I went in the kitchen and I said, well, because my dad cooked. My mother was a horrible cook. And my dad would cook. My dad was a great cook. But I went into the kitchen, I remember this, and I said, well, why aren't the men helping? And to a person, they all turned and looked at me like I had 3 heads. Like, what? They're not going to come in, the men? Yeah, and so I learned then that traditional roles still prevailed. Now, this was the 2nd generation of women. Yeah, so I don't know if that explains it. I think that there might be some concern as a nationalistic approach to maintaining Greekness. And what does that mean? Does that mean you speak Greek? Does that mean you're Orthodox? Does that mean that you claim it as your lineage only? Does it mean, now that I know my DNA, that I'm really, really Greek, Peloponnese, thousands of years, whatever? Does that mean I'm Greek? What does that mean? I have, I guess, actually embraced that. I have my grandfather's beautiful brown eyes, and I love those. I yell a lot. I have all the mannerisms. I understand Greek people when I'm around them. There's that unspoken communication that we all get. I love how when you go to church and children are acting out a little bit, it doesn't matter who's near them. They can be gently disciplined, and the mother won't mind because that's what you do. It's a community. I find Greek people to be loving, welcoming, unconditionally most of the time. I love that. So I feel very comfortable around Greek people. When we went to Greece, we ended up at a restaurant that was run by a couple. And so I love this, right? So I went in and I didn't speak much Greek, but I made friends with the wife who was and so we're back in the back and, we're talking food, we're cooking, whatever. And seriously, we were only there a few days, and she and I cried when we left because, we had forged that bond without a whole lot of words. We just understood each other, and we understood the life that she was living with her husband and son and trying to make a living and cooking and, all of that. And I understood that. I will say when I started writing the book, if I had not been part of the Greek community, it would have been really hard to get people's stories. But because I could say, I grew up in this business, I understand what your family went through, then I have automatic credibility. So that was really important. Did that answer your question?
Very well said, very well put. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Now, I would like us to focus on the book. How that started, how it came about to think about a book like this. And it's a very important book. And how difficult or easy is to study the Greek American community in terms of records, in terms of sources?
Yeah. The book started, was working on a PhD at the University of Illinois. I'm an older student, you have to understand, so I'm in my 50s. And I'm also working at the Candy Kitchen because, you know, I don't have anything else to do. And my husband's a historian, so I had a topic for my dissertation all ready to go. And then people started coming into our store after we reopened. And they would say, oh, you know, when I grew up in New York City, there was this place in our neighborhood that was just like this. And if you go into our building, we look like all of the confectionaries across the country. The floor is the same, the back booth's the same, the soda fountain's the same. So then I had people coming in from all the little towns around us. Oh, you know, we had a place in Villa Grove, we had a place in Pana, we had a place in, you know, we all knew Champaign-Urbana. So I thought, well, maybe there's a story there. So I went home to my husband, the historian, professional, educator. I said, you know, I think I could write my dissertation on the first generation Greeks. He said, I don't know if there's enough material out there. So I thought, well, maybe there isn't. And such a great question, because that's when I called up to the church and said, I'm looking for stuff. Bring me your records. To be honest, there weren't a lot that people had in their own personal collections. I don't know if it was just the Central Illinois Greeks, not a lot of letter writing, not a lot of photographs. And that was across the board. You know, my grandfather didn't have many photographs of the business. The census data was interesting, culling through that. And again, I caution all of you, if you're on Ancestry, just double, triple check, because it is according to the recorder. So we'd have different birth dates. The challenge, another big challenge I had, were newspapers. Unfortunately, the newspaper collection in our part of the country is awful. The University of Illinois said, oh, we have, you know, on digitalized all of the small town newspapers. They do, but they don't. And some of the copying was horribly done, so you can't even read it. I was so lucky in our hometown. My brother's wife's father owned the newspaper. So I went down there, and my husband and I started digging through the old newspapers. Unfortunately, now they have all been destroyed. I got there seriously just in the nick of time. I did discover the Champaign-Urbana newspapers, the Decatur, the bigger urban area newspapers had articles on the small towns, so that helped. I also dug through the church records, the celebration of the Greek churches. Now you have to understand where we are. The Greek churches were younger, so they had a lot of great stuff there. I went through high school yearbooks, which had ads for the confectionaries and the soda fountains, which were fascinating. So what I did learn, which was interesting, I learned that a lot of the advertising in the early 20s, the Greeks would emphasize how clean they were, how clean their stores were in the yearbooks. Part of that was the advent of public health regulations. I think another part of that was we're immigrants. We want you to know we're clean. I saw that as a real kind of message. I thought that was really interesting. I looked everywhere for everything. So what I ended up doing then too was interviewing the second generation Greeks, which was great. For my dissertation, I had a lot of stories. When I turned that into a book, I went back literally with the handwritten copy, and I would say, please read this. I want to make sure that your story is correct, that this is what you want, because this is going into print. So I added some, I deleted some. One guy learned a lot about his dad that he didn't know anything, because I went through town records. I went through land records, city directories, so I could see where the Greeks had moved around in their town. Literally, they partnered with somebody, and then the next year oh no, I don't like that guy, I'm going to partner with somebody else. I understood all of that. So that was kind of fun. So I use a lot of different sources because that's what I had to do. So that was fun. But I will just say categorically the written records for the first generation were bad. So you have to figure out, well, how do I get at this? So that's what I did.
How long it took to write?
It took about a year. And God bless my sister, I sat home almost one whole summer. I did go in and dip candy now and then, but I sat at my kitchen counter and wrote.
Because it's almost 300 pages.
Yeah, my dissertation was 400
great
pages.
chapters and a conclusion, a lot of bibliography.
I enjoyed it. So I know there's a lot of repetition on the Pauls, the Gus's, the Nicks, one non-Greek person said, God, Ann, I got so sick of reading, Chris and Nick and because everybody had the same name. I said, oh, I know. If you're not Greek, you don't get it. But I enjoyed it. I had fun. So I would write a lot. And my husband actually edited the book, so we would have some interesting discussions.
And it is from the university press, which is great.
Thank you.
It is a university press behind that supported it. Do you feel that there are some or many areas of the Greek American experience which is untold stories and need more research? Like yours, for example. This is a totally untold story. The Greek Americans in small towns, because we know about the metropolis, we know about Chicago, we know about New York, but
and I think there's a whole area out west. There are a lot of Greeks, like in Utah. They were farmers and worked on the railroad and things. I know a lot of them went into the food business, but I think there's such an opportunity there to explore. A lot of restaurateurs, obviously, went into first generation. But there's a lot that are untold. And I think back to your question on being Greek, it would help this third generation, fourth generation, if they can go back through their grandparents' history. It will help them connect to being Greek, because there's such a lineage there. There's such a story there. And what humbled me over and over again was realizing, just coming to this country, and within one generation, for the most part, so successful. Now, not all the Greeks, were successful. And Salutos, the historian, estimated about 40%, returned to Greece for various reasons. But so successful to come to a country you don't speak the language. Usually you have a 4th grade education. You don't know what you're doing. You don't know how to make candy, right? You just decide, I'm going to do this. The Ku Klux Klan burns crosses on your yard, whatever. You just persevere. And I was just over and over again reading these stories and even talking to, the second and third generations. So proud, so proud of my grandfather.
How the book was received by various organizations or communities?
The Greeks love it, I think. I hope. I've had a lot of good compliments. It's been an eye-opener for my hometown, so that's been fun. I think I gave a place of pride for Tuscola, Illinois. I don't think they realized, So it lifted up our story, personally, my family's story. My cousins have all loved it, which, that's good. I really did take the stories around to the different Greeks to have them sign off on their family history, because, they would spurn me. Yeah, so I wanted to make sure they were happy. So they were. I think it's been received pretty well because I'm not an academic, and it's advertised as kind of an independent scholar. So some people are a little dismissive because it's an academic press. It is also in the food history category, which there are no recipes in it. I get that question. It is a history book, but it is food history, I guess, because the Greek diners are so iconic, the soda fountains so iconic. So it was a perfect storm with confectionery soda fountains morphing into diners and restaurants. It was the perfect storm historically. So it is a food history, if you will.
Yeah, because this is not only a Greek story, it is an American story.
It is an American story.
It's American history, it's not a Greek
Yeah,
history.
it is.
So you see the contribution of Greek Americans within the American society.
It's huge. Yeah. It really, really is. Yeah. And be proud of that. And I say to people, if you go back, to your grandparents or great-grandparents, they might have been candy makers, Even if they went to college and became lawyers later on, I don't know, but they might have, that's how they started out. Yeah, so who knew?
There are about 10 or 12 Hellenic chairs in various universities in America, who have from the East Coast all the way to the West Coast, many Greek studies or Byzantine studies programs. You had any help from them, or are they aware of your book?
I'm not sure if they're aware of it. I did have support from Greek Studies at the University of Illinois in Champaign. They were aware of it, and I did a talk for them. But I haven't heard from, universities around the country, the Hellenic Studies universities. But, this was...
Definitely the Hellenic American Project and Queen's College were very aware and very thankful.
It.
And it will be a great honor if you can read certain passages that you think you like more or randomly from your book, so we can document with Constantino here your own voice of this great book, this substantial research that you have done.
Well, one of the questions you had sent me to think about, and I was really thoughtful about this too, back to your question on, what is Greece and the nationalist perspective. I think with the Greek Revolution, historically to me, and my grandfather actually knew of that, and because he had not always good words about the Turks, so that was part of his history and his heritage. So I would just read a little bit. The Greek Revolution, as it was also known, was not simply a political event, but also a time when Greeks expressed and reaffirmed their Hellenism or Greekness, and underscored the importance of Greece to European civilization. Although small farmers, shepherds, and peasants fomented the revolution in the Peloponnese area, it was the Greek intellectuals who became the national voice of Greece and sought acceptance in the West, quote, by tracing a direct relationship between their own modern nation and European culture, taking advantage of the prominent position Hellenism enjoyed in the West, unquote. They promoted Greek's uniqueness in world history. And what I love about that is the part that the Peloponnese played in it. So instead of being that bifurcated, civilized Athens and, the peasant Peloponnese, it came together. And then it became one, and it became a nationalistic movement. And I think that's so important because the Peloponnese was so marginalized. They were starving. They were poor farmers. They left because they were hungry. And again, perfect timing to come to America. But they also went to South Africa. They went to Australia. They went around the world. But I think they had always been kind of this us and them relationship. And so this brought them together on a national stage. And I think for the most part kept them there. So that was important to me, and I'm glad that you raised that question. My grandfather always said he was a good Spartan, and he was he was sturdy, I'll just say that. Another, in my words, thing that I like, which to me kind of captures the whole experience of coming to this country. So I'll just read a little bit from that. The first generation of Greek immigrants in central Illinois and across the Midwest began their journeys along paths similar to those of their urban compatriots in Chicago or St. Louis, but perhaps because they were more independent or adventurous or entrepreneurial, they struck out on their own. It is this last leg of their life's journey that offers such a unique and rich topic for study and allows us, from the vantage point of the immigrant, which is what I love, to consider this experience at the local and rural level. So redefining place by the sole Greek male or Greek family in a small town, claiming one's space with a newly outfitted soda fountain and candy counter display, and projecting one's agency amid overt Ku Klux Klan resistance are the components that distill the rural immigrant experience into one of daily reality. And I think, so I tear up, but I think that's what I was trying to capture. You know, it was just the day-to-day life in a new country. And so there you go. So that's what I was trying to do.
It's fantastic, and I think it has a tremendous direct effect because the voice of your book, you use the I instead of the third person, and I found that very strong.
Thank you.
Tell us about that, the I.
Well,
although you talk about community at the same time and history, but also the individual, and it is a great balance and combination between the individual and the community.
Well, thank you. As we were sharing earlier, when I was in graduate school back in the day, that was forbidden to use personal anything, because then you weren't really, I don't know, serious or academic or... I wanted to write in my own voice, but my grandfather's story. So I went to my advisor and I said, I'd like to make this a personal story. I'd like to use my grandfather as the case study that weaves through. And he said, that's fine, do it. And so that made it easier to write the whole book because I could always then personalize it. I mean, these are my people. This is my community. These are, you know, and the one thing with the Greeks is, you know, a lot of us are related. I don't care, you know, if I can go to Champaign and so I was talking to relatives of the Vriners or Vrinios family, and we discovered we're cousins, you know, we're on the phone, you know, with each other. And we kind of knew each other growing up, but all of a sudden it's like, we're cousins. Like, holy moly. And so that was fun. So, you know, these are my people. And I felt very comfortable writing about it personally, but also as a community. And I felt comfortable because they embraced the stories too. And they supported the effort of writing the stories. So that was important. So I was blessed by the candy gods and the restaurant gods. Go forth and write.
And also, I like how, although we spoke about males and female Greek males and females, I found it very interesting because one of my favorite passages is when you describe a story how a father is so affectionate with his children, and for this generation that it was distant from children, you present another image of the Greek male who, on one hand, is hardworking, But then the family values are so important, and even spending time with the children at a time that it wasn't very typical for males to show their emotions.
I wouldn't say my grandfather was affectionate, but I knew he loved us and cared about us. And he also was hard of hearing, so he really yelled a lot. He scared me growing up, even when I was older. But he would like pat me on my knee. I would drive him home after work, and he'd give me a pat on the knee. I never felt like I wasn't cared for. And I think even with my aunts, particularly my father's sisters, I felt very cared for by them. But the men, I don't know. Maybe if you're the only Greek family in town, then you embrace your family more. Yeah, but I've never seen...
You have a description when the father dressed up like Santa in the full costume, and try to make the children be happy, etc. So for that generation, the American dream wasn't only making money. The American dream also was to have a good family and establish community.
Yes. Yes.
Is this different now for the community?
I don't think so. I don't feel like it is. I know, I will say, growing up in a family business, we were aware of how we all made money or didn't make money. We all realized how we participated in that process, which was important. So, because my sister and I would ask ourselves, why did we go back into the candy business? And my mother, till the day she died, thought we had lost our minds. I didn't send you girls to college so you could work so hard. We must have missed it. I mean, because part of being in the family was being at the store working, because we were a family there too. And my sister's children have grown up in the store, and they will tell you that too. Like the school bus would drop them off at the store. I loved it. So, no, I'm trying to think of all my relatives. Did anybody not feel like they were family? No. Even when my Chicago Greek cousins would come visit us after we opened our store, they were old. They drove their Cadillac about 90 miles an hour down here. We thought, well, they're going to be killed. They were so affectionate and loving, and I don't know, I never felt like... I will say this, though. We were expected to work. Unless you're in the hospital, you go to work. I mean, seriously. So there was not a lot of compassion for illness or inability to, or you're having a bad day, you're depressed, don't want to come to work. Too bad, so sad. Get up, get in here. And my father sometimes would call, and he wouldn't say, hi, how are you doing? He'd just say, get in here, click, and we knew then we had to run uptown and go to work. There was that. So, we all grew up expecting to work and work hard, period. And we all did that.
You find it is harder or easier for young women now to start a business? What would be your advice, or what you like to say as your experience?
I think it's
some hardcore values that they should be transmitted to the later generation.
I think it's easier, actually. I think young women today are much more savvy about what they're doing. I think it depends on what business they want to be in. I think the social media, if you're going into the food business, you see a lot of role models now for women. It is now discriminatory to not get loan, we were flat out, oh, I'm sorry, we're not going to give you a loan, which probably was discriminatory, but I think it's easier. It's a lot of hard work, but I think younger women now too know how to network better than my generation did. the expectations are that they can do it, and I think that makes it easier for them. Is it easier? Probably not. It's scary as hell to be in your own business. It's hard work, but if you have that in you, then you should do it, because you won't be happy. I find the Greeks don't like working for people overall. They like working for themselves. Even if they're in a business where they work for another person or they work within a company, if they think they're working for themselves, they're much better. If that makes sense.
And your concluding words about the Greek American community of Chicago?
I don't know much about the Greek American community in Chicago. I know it's active. I think it is all over the city now. You know, it's in the suburbs. It's not just here around here on Halsted with Jane Addams and Hull House. So I think there is still an emphasis on education, but I don't know much about them because I'm not up here that much. So.
But I hope they're going to know more about you and your family history through that book.
So far, we've been trying to get the word out. There have been so many great Chicago confectionery stories that have, you know, and I know the Hellenic Museum has done an exhibit of that. They have some good books that other Greeks have written about the candy business and things. So that's important, yeah, too. We were highlighted in one of their exhibits a few years ago. Yay. So, thank you so much.
Dr. Anne FLESOR BECK, thank you very much for the interview. Dear Anne, we appreciate, and I believe this is one of the most important interviews we have in our
well,
archives.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I've appreciated it. Love you.